this is a sermon for the 22nd Sunday of Pentecost, for which the gospel appointed is Matthew 22, verses 34 through 40 or something like that. It's where the lawyer asks Jesus, what's the most important commandment? And Jesus responds with the now famous summary of the law, which must be the most famous Jesus saying, I would think. Maybe blessed are the peacemakers, or turn the other cheek for those who aren't more intimately involved with Christian spirituality. But this squib from Matthew is the heart and soul of what Jesus taught, the core principle, or the mission statement, even as we might say it today. It appears prominently in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and maybe that's enough for a Bible study, but we need to know, if you didn't already, that Jesus didn't make this up. The Shema from Deuteronomy 6:4 is the central affirmation of faith for Judaism, for many Jews who say it twice a day, morning and evening. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Apologies for mispronunciations. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And as for you, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And then Jesus goes on to add a second sentence to the core teaching, which is from Leviticus 19. Now, Leviticus 19, which is to love your neighbor as yourself. Leviticus 19 Leviticus is one of those books of the Bible that's a real sleeper, especially if you're trying to do this, read the Bible, whole Bible in a year, which I don't recommend. But if you know what you're looking for, and you can pay attention through all the lists of ordinances, Leviticus is pretty amazing. Leviticus 19 begins by saying, you shall be holy. You shall be holy, because I, your Creator, am holy. And then it describes how to be holy. Verses 17 through 19 are about not hating one another, and so not bearing a grudge against one another. Rather, love one another and love your neighbor as yourself, it says. There's a whole chapter about relationships that goes on to say, quote, the foreigner who resides among you shall be to you as a citizen among you. You shall love the foreigner as yourself, for you were foreigners in the land of Egypt. In other words, loving our neighbor as ourselves does not mean just the people we know and who we think are just like us. So let those with ears, as Jesus was fond of saying, hear. There are a whole lot of us in this sad and bitter world who need to hear. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. This is how we are to be holy, how we are to be holy. Like the Creator from whom we have life is holy. This is how or what we are to do to love God and to love neighbor and to love self. Now, there's no reason for you to feel defensive right now, just because you know in your gut that you're not good at this. In fact, it's a lot better to be defensive than complacent, because if we imagine ourselves to be model citizens at being this kind of holy, that's much harder to work our way out of than blindness or denial. So the truth is, we are not that good at this loving thing. We may be good at loving our family members, and we may be good at loving a few other people that we kind of like and think are pretty much okay. But then there are all those other people. Truly, we do not love that many people as we love ourselves, and in some cases, as we wished we loved ourselves. The truth is, I think, what's going on with Israel and Hamas right now could happen in many parts of the world, including many parts of our own country. We hear rhetoric already, even in the House of Representatives, even in school boards and city councils and churches. And the distance between rhetoric and actions when it comes to hate is a very thin line. It gets crossed even without intention once the rhetoric is embraced and normalized. If there is one thing that we could say is incumbent upon us when we engage in spiritual community, it is that we will not espouse or be part of normalizing hate. Now, the hard part of that is that when we champion a particular policy or party or politic, we so often do it with hatred towards those who are foreign to our way of thinking. Now, we might not think of ourselves as haters, but animosity and anger and fierce partisanship easily and quickly bleed into hatred, even when it's just a low-level burn rather than a full-throated vitriol. Now, I know that Jesus and the Bible do not have the kind of credibility or authority they once did, at least not in the polite society where many of us hang out way too often. But this how to be holy business, well, that ought to catch our attention at least a little bit. Why? Because we know it's true. We know it. We know it from our own experience. Our own experience of loving and failing to love. And our experience of being hated and not being loved. We know deep down in our bones how true this how to be holy thing is. It doesn't have to be measured or replicated because we can see and hear and feel it. We can even smell it in the failure of it in Gaza, in Lewiston, in Mariupol. And at the same time, we can point to moments in our own lives that are cauterized in our memory when someone loved us unexpectedly, even against expectations, or when they had to cross a boundary to love us like they did. We will never forget those moments or those people. If we believe in God, it's likely that it is with such people and such experiences of being loved that we associate the very definition of God. Now, having said all this, I feel a little sheepish today standing up here saying what you already know about loving God and loving our neighbor as ourselves. I don't have any special wisdom or magic tricks. And in fact, I suspect that many of you are way better at loving and resisting hatred than I am. But one of the things any preacher has to do is learn to preach from his or her own failures and our own brokenness, and preach across our own hypocrisy, or else, frankly, we wouldn't have much of anything to say. So when Matthew and Jesus and ancient Israel challenge us with the Shema and the holiness teachings of Leviticus, the only thing to do is to put it out there, to look at it, and to say, duh. Are we lovers or are we haters? Do we resist our desires to hate? Do we practice our choices to love? Do we acknowledge our resistance to loving others? Do we deny how poorly we love ourselves? Do we admit that our core principle is loving even those we fear and do not trust? Or do we pretend that there are certain people we're allowed not to love? I think honesty is the best policy here. Start where we are and go from there. In AA, what they call the big book, There is a description I always found chilling when it was read out loud. It goes like this, and this is about recovery and alcoholism. Those who do not recover, it says, are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program, usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. Grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. I think that's how we become lovers instead of haters. If we get good at rigorous honesty with ourselves first and then gently with one another, we begin to recognize when our thoughts and our actions are turning toward hatred and away from loving. Loving is not an emotion, of course. It's a cadre of actions. Are our actions demonstrating love of God, of one another, of ourselves? Or is what we are doing contributing to indifference and then potentially to hatred? When we are being honest, it isn't even very tricky. It's very clear. We know, because we know how we need to be loved. And we know when we are being abused or disrespected or hated. So if we're being honest with ourselves and one another, it becomes clear what we're doing and whether or not we are loving. Shema. Hear, O Israel. The Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And as for you, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. And in turn, love your neighbor as yourself. Let's begin with honesty and then move on to recovery. Hey, thank you for being here, and peace be with you. That was beautiful, Lisa.